What is stagflation and how to stop it? Stagflation, the combination of slow economic growth and rising prices, is a growing concern worldwide as inflation increases beyond 8% and a recession looms. Is it, however, a cause for alarm for the average American? Lindsay Pigza, the chief economist of Stagflation, a financial investment firm, argues that, at this point, we cannot conclude that we are now in the face of stagflation. However, that is a very real risk given the current economic scenario. At a 40-year high inflation rate every month, the Federal Reserve has decided to raise interest rates to address the problem. A combination of the Fed's aggressive interest rate policies and global supply chain disruptions might lead to higher prices at the same time as the economy declines, according to Pigza. Even as recently as last year, many analysts predicted that 2022 would see the start of a robust recovery. Post-COVID, businesses would be able to resume normal operations. Consumers will be able to spend their accrued savings on all of the vacations and activities they have missed out on because of the pandemic. A new Roaring Twenties, others claimed, an allusion to the decade of consumerism that followed World War I, would be a new era in American history. The Arab oil embargo of the 1970s is the most frequent cited analogy for the current economic crisis, which has lasted for several months. The terrible combination of high prices and sluggish growth is known as stagflation. It occurred even while economies around the world slowed to double-digit rates. Stagflation is once again a possibility. In many nations, inflation rates have exceeded predictions, rising to the highest levels in decades, while economic growth prospects are fast eroding following the double shock of COVID-19 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. To better understand stagflation, we'll look at what it is, how it works, what you can do to lessen its influence on your everyday life, and how to stop it. What is stagflation and how it affects you? Stagflation is characterized by both high inflation and weak economic development. An economist from the consultancy business Graphs and Laughs states that, quote, "The general notion of stagflation is high inflation and high unemployment," Elliot Eisenberg said. Despite rising costs for a wide range of items, we aren't suffering from stagflation at this time due to a strong economy and low unemployment. This is about where it was before the COVID-19 outbreak, at 3.6 in April. Eisenberg insists that this is not yet stagflation. It's also possible that the world's supply shocks could cause us to enter a stagflationary period in the future. Stagflation raises the levels of financial uncertainty. The risk of losing revenue rises as unemployment rises. The abrupt rise in the price of essentials also reduces household spending power that can keep their jobs. Due to rising prices for products and services, this is a double whammy for you. At the same time, you have to deal with the impacts of slower domestic economic activity, Pigza argues. 2 historical events that led to stagflation. Economic woes in the late 1970s. After World War II, the United States' economic dominance was unmatched for 25 years. Indeed, the post-war United States was in the middle of the greatest prosperity the world has ever known, according to contemporary commentators. The GNP of the United States increased from $200 million in 1940 to more than $500 million in 1960, a measure of all goods and services produced by a country's population. America's standard of living doubled between 1945 and the early 1960s due to productivity growth. The United States has 40% of the world's wealth despite only having 6% of the world's population. The late 1960s, on the other hand, were a worrying time. Between 1968 and 1970, the unemployment rate grew by 33%, while the consumer price index rose by 11%. Actual earnings began to stagnate in the same period. Stagflation, or simultaneous inflation and stagnation, baffled economists because it was unusual to see both inflation and stagnation at the same time. As a result, Americans' purchasing power declined and their exports became more expensive, putting them at a competitive disadvantage in the global market. In 1971, the United States saw its first negative international trade balance in more than a century. What triggered this slump? Inflation was fueled by the enormous costs of the Vietnam War and the expansion of social programs at home without corresponding tax increases, or the price of goods and services. US manufacturing, particularly in the automotive industry, has lost ground to more cost-effective competitors in other countries like Germany and Japan. Service employment, which pays less and has fewer benefits than those in the manufacturing sector, is becoming increasingly commonplace in the United States. It was difficult for people born in the late stages of the baby boom to find work, as the number of women and immigrants entering the workforce swelled. Oil crisis. By instituting a 90-day wage and price freeze in 1971, Richard Nixon hoped to alleviate inflation. Meanwhile, he attempted to promote exports by depreciating the dollar and removing it from the gold standard. As long as Nixon was re-elected in 1972, these tactics were effective, but they failed to address the underlying causes of the problem. When the energy crisis struck, it was too late. In the Yom Kippur War, two countries, named Egypt and Syria, launched an unexpected attack on Israel, prompting the United States to support the Jewish state. In response to the United States' devaluation of the dollar, or the currency used to purchase oil, oil-rich nations in the Middle East decided to impose an oil embargo. The United States and Israel's European allies are under an oil shipping embargo by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia. An immediate and severe impact was felt. The price of oil surged 387% to $11.65 a barrel. At the gas stations, long lines have developed. The United States consumed a third of the world's oil, and its residents quickly realized how essential cheap oil was to their daily lives. Automobiles were the primary mode of transportation for many families in the suburbs. Oil prices were 33% higher than they were when the embargo ended in March 1974, even after the crisis was over. Post-World War II. Inflation and the oil embargo indicated that the post-World War II Renaissance in the United States was drawing to a close. It has been revealed that the United States' authority abroad was limited in Vietnam and then in the Middle East. Globalization has intensified as information technology has made communication and coordination simpler, resulting in a resurgence of the economic depression of the 1970s. Because of the high labor costs of the United States, many manufacturing jobs have been sent overseas. 80% of all occupations in the United States are now in the service sector. U.S. oil dependence has decreased since the embargo, in part due to the country's efforts to minimize its use of foreign oil and increase domestic oil output and efficiency, among other things. There has never been a period in American history when growth was as rapid and unfettered as it was during the quarter century after World War II. Since then, the chapter of America's history has been closed. The beginning of a new age was marked by uncertainty. How to stop stagflation? Solving stagflation is no easy task, but here are two ways to probably stop it. Number 1. Supply-side solutions. Privatization and deregularization are two supply-side measures that can combat stagflation by increasing aggregate supply, or AS, and lowering production costs. There is no getting around that this will take a very long time. There is nothing that the US government can do if a global increase in oil and food price causes cost-push inflation. There are fears about stagflation in the US, but finding a solution isn't straightforward. Number 2. Wage control. Stagflation in the 1970s was exacerbated by growing wages from powerful trade unions. Pay control was a program that attempted to restrain wage increases by government actions. It is theoretically possible to stop wage inflation by limiting increases in wages. What can you do to get prepared for stagflation? Stagflation isn't out of the question, even if the economy doesn't grow as quickly as it used to. According to Eisenberg, the Federal Reserve is hiking interest rates to combat inflation, which has previously led to a rise in the risk of a recession. It's going to be a tense scenario, and the chances of the Fed getting it wrong are significant since they don't know what the future holds, he argues. You can take measures even if the future is uncertain. For example, panicking and selling off your investments is a bad idea. As an alternative, this is the perfect time to reevaluate your approach and return to the basics like saving and investment diversification. Consider your spending and saving habits. Make a plan for your finances and stick to it to achieve your most essential financial goals. You might want to think about delaying large purchases if you're in a position to do so. According to Eisenberg, quote, "The market is telling me not to buy the car. Don't buy the car. Wait for years, and eventually it will get cheaper down the line." If you're not spending it, put it towards your savings or an emergency fund. To put yourself in a better position or situation in the future, you should consider your spending and saving habits. Get ideas for increasing your earnings. Even if your income doesn't change, the rising rent, petrol, and food expenses mean that you'll have less money left in your pocket at the end of the day. Eisenberg argues that wages aren't keeping pace with inflation. There is a decline in real income. Eisenberg argues that, quote, "Firms are desperate to hire," unquote, because of the low unemployment rate. Investigate your options for getting new work or increasing your current income through negotiation. Diversifying your income is another option for those who can't raise their wages or find a new career. But it's not the only option. This year, you can try your hand at various lucrative side hustles.